Hi everybody, it's me, the Fedge, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, the Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin. And today we're going to interview Peter Moon, and we're going to be talking about his new videos and information articles that he has released explaining the math and physics of time travel. So we're going to talk about time travel, and he's got a whole series of educational audios and videos where we're going to talk these things, and my computer is not cooperating so I can read his bio. Here we go. And before we bring on Peter, I want to tell you a little bit about Peter Moon. Peter was born and raised in California. He's primarily known for his investigation of space-time projects. These concern projects in the past, present, and future that control both time and perception of time. An avid reader as a young man, he studied creative writing and literature, and was particularly interested in both the scientific extrapolations of science fiction as well as the high adventure that it provided. His interest in Eastern religion and Western occultism culminated in a unique career and association that centered around the private concerns of L. Ron Hubbard, a renowned science fiction writer who was an accomplished occultist, but is also known as a controversial founder of Dianetics and Scientology. Peter went out on his own in '83 and moved to Long Island, where his unique background enabled him to forge an association with scientist Preston Nichols, one of the world's foremost experts in the world on electromagnetic phenomena, who had been involved in strange experiments at the Montauk Air Force Station on Long Island, which included the manipulation of time. Their collaboration writing the Montauk Project, Experiments in Time, and its subsequent sequels have now reached legendary proportions. Peter's work caught the attention of time control scientist Dr. David Anderson of the Time Travel Research Center on Long Island, now reincorporated as the Anderson Institute in New Mexico, who invited him to Romania and paved the way for him to investigate other space-time projects as discussed in the Transylvania series, one of which includes what has been called the most amazing archaeological artifact in the history of mankind, a chamber that contains a holographic record of the Earth's history, as well as holographic readouts of human DNA and also other species. So it's a new series of videos, Time Travel Theory Explained, which explains in simple language the actual scientific principles, demonstrating that time travel is within the boundaries of ordinary mathematics and physics. Wow, that's a great new bio, Peter. Sash, Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say before we bring on Peter?
Well, it seems that our ancestors had this incredible tunnel system all throughout the mountains, through Transylvania, through the Balkans, through Romania and Bosnia, that whole area, and there's tunnels that go and ways of conveying under the earth in this huge sort of hollow spaces and civilizations there. And right at the entrance to this, Seymour Asmagarish and others have started to probe in there. What's in there? And what's in there is incredible stuff. And Peter has been fortunate enough to be close to this, to know more about it than lots of us. And we want to know a lot about what's under there and what can it do for humanity.
Welcome to our show, Peter Moon. And Sean, we're getting a little bit of feedback. I wonder if you can do something on your end to correct that. But welcome to our show, Peter.
Thank you. It's nice to be back with both of you again, and I don't hear any feedback on my end, but we'll let Sean
take
feedback.
Yeah, it sounds like a wind tunnels, Sean, just in case you can do something. But if not, we'll just work around it, work around the wind tunnel. So this is fascinating research that you're bringing to the forefront. I know that you've been involved with this in many, many years. So tell us, I was trying to wrap my head around the video with David Anderson. I only got to listen to the audio part of it, but you're talking about invariance of space-time interval, light cones, tipping light cones. Yeah, can you explain all that stuff to us?
Well, I will do my best. Of course, I got involved with time travel in 1990 when I began to listen to the then public lectures of Preston Nichols. And after 6 months, of course, formed an association with him, which is the Montauk Project Experiments in Time book. And what was so incredible about that, Preston was bringing forth to the ideas that time travel had occurred, and there was meat to his story. The science was very esoteric, and he didn't reveal all of it. And he said at the time, he says, this stuff is only a dream. We can't do what we could do at Montauk, 10 years earlier. Duncan Cameron, the lead psychic in the project, said the same thing. He said, we were great then, but we can't do this now. Now, all of this book eventually came into the hands of Dr. David Anderson, who at that time, unbeknownst to all of us, had a time travel research center on Long Island. And he was creating a time travel museum to collect all information on time travel that he could. And this ranged from comic books to regular books to art. And basically, David found the Montauk Project. He read the book. He said it woke him up as a spiritual being, because up to that time he'd been a scientist. And he came to some of our meetings on Long Island, which we had at the time, the Montauk Night meetings, and befriended me, said he wanted to work with me. And that was in 1999, so it's been a period of 17 years that I've known him, and things have developed very slowly, but it's taken me from researching and understanding time, courtesy of Preston Nichols and David Anderson, to be able to put these into about 40 minutes worth of videos, more or less 40 minutes, that basically explain the math and physics of time travel, that shows that time travel does not violate the laws of mathematics and physics. I put out a newsletter on this last June, and David was so impressed with it because he says nobody's ever had the patience to sit down and do this and explain it so clearly. He says, can I use this when I go to lecture at universities? I said, well, certainly. So I then decided last fall to put it into a video series to promote my new website, which I'm working on, which will have more videos. And these videos are free, 7 videos that start with what you were asking about, something called the invariance of the space-time interval. Now, the invariance of the space-time interval is not a new concept to science. And everything in these videos is nothing new. It's using the bells and whistles and props and principles of ordinary mathematics and ordinary physics. And this work first appeared in popular literature or scientific literature with a man named Kurt Gödel, who was a colleague of Einstein's.
Mm-hmm.
And Einstein considered, I'm getting my guys confused. This was John Everett Wheeler, who was Kurt Gödel gave us the closed timelike curve, which is something we'll also be talking about. But the invariance of the space-time interval was put into popular literature by John Everett Wheeler, who's the co-author of the Everett-Wheeler hypothesis, or many worlds theory. And the many worlds theory is the idea that every time the whole Schrodinger's cat idea is that every time you kind of branch off continuously into new parallel universes, there's all these infinite universes. That's a very fast and easy way to put the theory, perhaps a little oversimplification, but this is
what makes it branch into different universes?
It goes back to the ancient concept of Brahma in the Hindu religion. Every time Brahma breathes, he breathes out a new universe, a new world.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea, although it's couched in scientific jargon, it's basically an ancient religious or philosophical concept of instantaneous. But this is not really what the invariance of it. He's famous for that. He's more famous for that, the Everett-Wheeler hypothesis, parallel worlds, than he is for the invariance of the space-time interval. And the invariance of the space-time interval is a very simple concept. And it's best if I can dare to try, it's explained in the videos very visually, which are accessible at digitalmontauk.com. It will tell you how to access the videos. You enter your email and push the access button or whatever it says, and you will be led to the videos as long as you end up clicking on the store, which is it's a free store on those videos. Now, the invariance of the space-time interval is a concept like if you can imagine being on a spaceship and have a flashlight, and across from the flashlight is a mirror. And you flash the flashlight at the mirror. And this spaceship is traveling, let's say for argument's sake, at the speed of light. And by the time that flashlight reaches the mirror, neither the flashlight nor the mirror will be in the same space. They will be so many 300,000 seconds, forget what the exact number is, down the distance. They won't be in the same place. That's the important point. They won't be in the same place. So because you will have where the flashlight was and where it is, and where the mirror was and is, you will have 4 points, which form a rectangle. A rectangle that's, and then from that rectangle, you can connect the points where the light was going to hit, where it did hit, and then that hypotenuse, the diagonal between the 2 points, creates a triangle. And that's a Pythagorean system you can use, a squared plus b squared plus c squared. And what this does is establish that time is now distance. Time can be defined in terms of distance.
Yes,
now,
the coordinates.
Pardon me?
The coordinates.
Exactly. Now, this in itself shows us that time is convertible into distance. Now, that doesn't mean that this is the full and complete definition of time, but it's a workable definition of time. And this is called the invariance of the space-time interval, because actually what happens is you're actually creating frames. You're creating so many frames per second in reality. Each moment in space is moving. It's sort of like a camera. If we can think of life moving like when you have all these, when you slow down a 36 millimeter film and it's all in frames. Mm-hmm. And people who do hallucinogenic drugs will sometimes see things in frames. So this gets into the idea of time becomes very convertible into distance from another perception point. And this is the first rung. Now, I go deeper into it in the videos, which are not long, but all these videos are based upon a building block construction. One feeds the other. I try to use similar visuals later in the subsequent videos so one can go back to it. And these are written at a level that a 7th or 8th grader could understand, and perhaps even a younger person. But if you have an adult who is a little bit balky at ordinary scientific terms, which I seek to explain, I said, first you have to understand the Pythagorean theorem, and they can go back and look up the words they don't understand and go back over these videos several times, and they will get them. They will get them if they, so it's very easy to understand. And then the next proposition we're dealing with is the concept, and this is an ordinary physics concept, but it's not well known by a lot of people that have, PhDs and whatnot that I've talked to that aren't necessarily physicists, is the concept of a light cone. And I first learned of the light cone from David Anderson when I was in Romania, because he lectured and tutored me on these subjects. And a light cone is an idea of just an art. Every point in space is like a pixel on a computer screen. A pixel. Only we're talking about 3 dimensions here. But a light cone, when we're thinking of it in 2 dimensions to make it easy graphics, a light cone is basically just a cone. Each point in space comes out like a cone. It has a forward energy and a backward energy. When I say forward, that's forward in time or backwards in time. And the reason this light cone cannot exceed 45 degrees has to do with this invariance of the space-time interval, which I spoke earlier of, which is going to be moving in a diagonal line. If you're talking at the speed of light, it's not going to exceed 45 degrees. It all has to, and this is all explained why the math of it is. It's a little hard to address it when we're talking here verbally without visual diagrams. But a light cone is an arbitrary designation of every single point in space is a light cone. And these light cones will go no further than 45 degrees, and they just go forward. They go forward or they go backwards. And in between the light cone is what's called the here and now point. I shorten it to the now point. But why these light cones become significant is because there was a scientist named Frank Tipler. In 1974, he did a paper as a graduate student, which he established something called the Tipler cylinder. And the Tipler cylinder was a hypothetical cylinder that showed that if you had I forget the exact amount, but you had so much gravity, if you could create gravity that was much more powerful than the sun, you could actually tip light cones, physically tip them so that they were actually diverging off the timeline. So he showed that you could basically you could bend gravity could bend light. And this is what he was demonstrating, and it was scientifically acclaimed. It was scientifically acknowledged, except that it was not feasible. You can't be creating Tipler cylinders that are many times more powerful than the sun. You just can't do it. So these 2 concepts, the invariance of the space-time interval and the idea of tipping light cones, were part of the theories that demonstrated that basically light cones could be tipped. Now, light cones could be tipped. That might seem a little like, what the hell are we talking about here? But I was mentioning earlier a friend of Einstein's, Kurt Gödel. And Einstein thought Kurt Gödel was much more intelligent than he was. But Kurt Gödel, and he says, the only reason I stay on staff at Princeton is so I can walk home with Kurt Gödel and listen to him. But Kurt Gödel, or Gödel, we'd say it Gödel, he basically took earlier concepts and he kind of finished them off of what's called a closed timelike curve. And the closed timelike curve is basically a series of light cones that are tipped consecutively. See, if you tip a light cone and take it off, it's going forward in time, and say you tip it a little bit with a Tipler cylinder or however you tip it, and you keep tipping it in a series of tips, it'll come back and loop around back on itself. So this is called a closed time-like curve. Now, you might be familiar with a concept of Einstein that if you draw a straight line and just draw it forever and ever, it'll eventually come back and meet itself. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Right.
But that is basically a closed time-like curve, which tells us the whole universe is a big loop. This is something that Preston Nichols talked about, as did Duncan Cameron. They talked about loops. Time is a big loop. They didn't necessarily use the scientific jargon, and I know Preston is familiar with the scientific jargon. He might have used a loop, much like a mechanic might use a slang term in a car rather than the official mechanics term. So basically, the closed time-like curve can come back on itself, but it can also be manipulated. If you can manipulate the closed time-like curve, whether by gravity or any other force, you can move the light cone. And when we're talking about a light cone, like any person is a bunch of light cones. He's like a bunch of pixels. It's the same thing. So if you can move a concentrated area of light cones, you can move them into different areas. It's been incorrectly thought you can only move them to the beginning of the time machine, but this is not true for the principles of math and physics. You can move them anywhere back into time. And these concepts are understandable if one goes to andersoninstitute.com and begins to study all of the science and descriptions that David Anderson gave. But I would venture to say that the average person is not going to be able to digest them to the point where, like what I've done is I've dumbed them down. I've dumbed them down, and I don't mean that in any pejorative sense, because I had to dumb them down for myself and make it as easy as possible for people to understand. And there were two reasons I could do this. Three reasons, actually. One was that I had the patience and stick-to-itiveness to do it. Two, I had been previously taught these concepts by David Anderson, so they were in the background of my memory, but I was taught these 6 years ago. And I sat down to study his website, and I was trying to write this article. I'm not sure why I began to do this. But anyway, I had my lovely new wife at the time. We've been married over a year now. But she was sitting there with me and watching me go through these mental gyrations. And the other reason I was able to do it is I would go into a dark room. And I do a Qigong practice. It's called the dark room, which is explained in my latest book, The White Bat. Very positive exercise, because what it does is it awakens your neuropeptides. This is part of why people smoke grass, marijuana. They want to get their neuropeptides cooking. It's not necessary to smoke grass. It's you go into a dark room. This is what the ancient, we're talking about the inner earth in the intro, the cave system. Well, this is what the Tibetans would go into the caves. Plato would talk about caves, and you go in, you get these neuropeptides cooking, and you begin to become more aware. Well, I was balancing my study of David's website by going into the dark room, and my wife was watching me wrestle through these. She said, I don't understand this, and then I began to get great illuminations, which are, I can almost compare it to the drug experience. I do not take drugs. I did have some drugs when I was a young person, so I have some idea of what the drug experience was. But it was sort of like, wow, I could really see this clearly. And one of the things I saw, which I found utterly fascinating, is as I just kind of saw very clearly that if you were to slow down the time rate in, say, a self-contained field, which David does in his research, if you slowed down the time rate these light cones would go into the future. And this is all on a graph, as we were talking about earlier. You'd see them go into the future. If you speeded up the time right, this field would go into the past. And the faster you would speed it up, the further back into the past it would go. The slower you would slow the time rate down, the further into the future it would go. When I finally got Dr. David Anderson on the phone, I took the opportunity to ask him this question. Is that what happens? He says, exactly, you're right. And I was able to deduce this from studying his stuff. So I was really getting it on a visceral level. Now, I'm working on 2 more videos, one of which is complete. It shows the patent on the time reactor. Now, these have not been released yet, and we can discuss why it hasn't been released. And then I'm also working on one that gives an abstract. I'm in the midst of this. I'd be working on it right now if I wasn't talking to you, lovely people. But it is to explain the time reactor. And I have some very interesting things to talk about with regard to this. If you want to continue giving me the floor, or if you want to stop me and ask questions,
Sash has a question for you.
Well, a few observations. A.R. Borden reported that the Linkage Institute and the people the extraterrestrials they were in contact with, use something which is totally explained by your concepts about how they were able to avoid a disastrous perigee of Nibiru. So that the concept is something that also our government, the Shago, reports that our government's been using this technology too. So this is all very consistent with what you're saying, and find it very exciting. And as to why you seem to have all these synchronistic experiences, I think that you've been tapped for part of the soft disclosure. You are an ambassador of the universe, taking us to ways of considering things, and you're doing it in a way that ordinary people can understand. And I think it's by design. That's my take.
Well, yes.
And I always
go ahead.
I just want to say, and you of all people are so patient. I've always admired your books because you go into a subject so deeply and intensely, like nobody else can quite do the way you do it, or very few people, I should say. And so,
patience.
It's like you've been tapped. Yes, well, patience is key.
It's interesting that you mentioned patience, and I can exhibit considerable patience. I can also cut the cord, when I see that I'm dealing with something that's nonsensical, and there's a lot of nonsensical stuff that comes across the internet these days. But I can be incredibly patient. And one of my friends, who was a fan who became a friend, he admired the way that I could go into a subject and be non-prejudicial against it. Like, for example, I know you people are familiar with, to say the least, you taught Tantra. Tantra is a subject that people can be incredibly judgmental with, even about talking about.
Right.
Other religions, you can meet. There's Christians in the Midwest that think Jews are from the devil, and so you have a lot of prejudice. And this goes into, but it goes into the average person that is even progressive. They have a lot of mental prejudices. People can be very prejudicial against the subject of time travel without realizing that they're kind of uninformed on the subject. And of course, if I want to get into prejudicial thinking, it goes into the way we breathe and eat. But we don't need to go off onto those subjects. We will stick to the time travel. But patience is a word that actually derives, it's connected to passion. And when we say passion, we're talking about the passion of the Christ. That's how it works into the linguistics, the language, the etymology of the word patience. And this is very interesting because patience shows what you might call an interference of time. It's a time barrier. So when you think of the passion of the Christ, Preston Nichols defined the Christ consciousness as the original timeline. And if you can think of what this idea of Christ, if we take a Christian lens and we say, well, he's going to come back in 2,000 years. He's going to come back the second coming. Well, everybody's there, sitting there waiting with their thumb literally up their ass. And we can take that thumb up the ass as a pun. We can examine that thumb with all of its implications, which I'm being kind of humorous here. But the whole idea of waiting for the Savior, waiting for the resolution, waiting for the deliverer. Well, what is a deliverer? He delivers something. UPS will deliver in 2 days. It will deliver in 3 days. It will deliver in a week. So this is, time becomes a concept. And I've run across people in this research who are very impatient for the time machine to come and resolve their issues. And of course, what the people need to learn is patience. And this is what you learn with meditation. You learn to be still. You learn to balance with Qigong. Qigong is all about equilibrium. So the time machine, the time reactor, all of these things have been a part of my consciousness. It's a professional activity that I indulge in, but the whole game is balancing. So, this is the interesting part of when you mention patience. But as Sasha was saying, yes, this stuff is consistent with other things that are going on out there. It's a big environment, and I've always sought to ground what I'm doing so that I try to write everything from a very human perspective, and so people can understand this. And also it creates a defense that people can't argue about. Now, I put this into such a language that scientists can no longer refute this or poo-poo it. When people have looked at David's website that were scientists, said this stuff is not true, because if it were true, we could do it. And this is a very arrogant statement, because it's like reading the New Testament and saying, well, if this were true, it's not true, because if it were true, I could do all the things that Jesus could do. And this is a stupid statement to make. I mean, it doesn't, whether you believe in Christianity or not, Christ is presented as a very evolved being coming direct from the Creator. So, people, their ego gets in the way of understanding this information, and the ego can be just a terrific barrier to understanding anything.
Yeah, I would just like to say I just absolutely love this concept that the ground of existence among all human beings is loving oneness. That we are, if you can come from that perspective, that is the ground, and that's the basis for having planetary peace. I'm right with you.
The basis for having what?
World peace.
Oh, world peace.
World support. Yes. Encouragement. Justice,
Well, I agree with you, and what has been coming up a lot lately is the unity of everything. Everything, and this is why the beauty of a practice of Taoism or Qigong, what it does is it equates the equilibrium, your own personal equilibrium with the universe, because that's really all you can solve. You cannot solve all the world's problems. You can solve your own sphere of activity. So, this is, we want to achieve harmony within, and this is where peace begins in the home, in the personal, your own personal aura, so to speak.
Agreed. Yeah, and there's a new article that's out about that. What was it? The DNA frequency can be changed by our own minds and our own meditation, and we can propel humanity from a level 0 civilization to a level 1 civilization. Kind of like the experiment of the meditators when they were in Cleveland or something, and they all gathered and the crime rate dropped. If we meditate and if we work on ourselves and activate our DNA, which is totally done by the mind, so the Russian scientists have proven that we can do it ourselves. We don't need any outside interference. We don't need God or anybody else. We have the capability within ourselves to activate the 256 strands of DNA that are now junk, quote unquote junk. So anyway, it's an interesting article. I have it on Aquarian Radio. about the latest discovery about how we can do this through our own spiritual meditative practice, and then we can create this world peace, which would, of course, solve all the problems. But let's go back to you and the time travel, and they're all connected. It's all connected. This time travel, realizing that there's many parallel worlds or timelines, that our thoughts are needs, that if we find ourselves going down a timeline we don't like, we can be the driver and switch lanes and go into a new reality.
Well, just you have all this information on basically what's become a clandestine technology of the people that run the world. Has there been sanctions applied to you? Has somebody tried to shut you up? How have you been able to be unharassed, or have you?
Well, the sanctions are very interesting. The sanctions are applied covertly and silently. And what the biggest challenge that I have had in terms of, I guess what you would say, the publicizing or marketing of my work is that that my adversaries do not make themselves visible. In other words, I might hear people saying, well, his work isn't documented, it's this, it's that. And the more I stick around, the more the work shows itself to not just have merit, but to have incredible merits. So, when you can't see your adversary, when he's invisible, you might hear people bad-mouthing you, but they're not really of much consequence. They are more of the symptom. So when you have people, and now this gets into a very interesting issue because I've been somewhat marginalized by the plethora of things that are on the internet. Everybody's been marginalized. The whole publishing industry has been marginalized. And I'm very happy that I've survived the marginalization of it, which a lot of big publishers have not. And smaller publishers certainly have not. We live in a time now when anybody can be an author and make noise, and they don't even have to have merit behind their work. All they need to do is be good at getting attention. So this is what one is competing with, in addition to people who have more sophisticated modus operandi. So I've been somewhat marginalized. So I can be ignored. Now, when David Anderson has come online, he has been, let me put it this way, to say that he's been attacked, but what happens, it's a very non-productive response he gets. He can get attention like you wouldn't believe. So in our last conversations, which were last June, he said, I'm more comfortable releasing some of this stuff through you. He wanted me to do 3 more papers for him. But I haven't heard anything back from him on that because he liked the way I dealt with his this stuff. And he hasn't commented on the videos. The videos have been sent to him. He's been told to watch them. And so he certainly knows they're about. But he was more comfortable with, letting me kind of, in a somewhat small way, release this information. Because on the surface, people react to this information in one of 2 ways. On the surface, they'll say, this is preposterous, it's stupid. On the other people say, oh, it's interesting, it's neat, I like it, I want to learn more. Now, those are surface reactions. Underneath that, there's another reaction, is when you really start to get the idea of time being malleable, which it is, people can become very uncomfortable with that. It's like, all of a sudden, if somebody said, we're not going to be living in houses anymore, the housing experiment is done, we're all going to be living in tribes, and people would start freaking out because they're going to lose all of their comfort references. What does the hell does this mean? Are we going to have televisions? Are we going to have internet? We're going to be living in tribes? What does this mean? They're going to be discomfort. So when you say we're going to be traveling in time, and their gray matter does not even think that way. So you're going into unfamiliar territory, and I'm basically making unfamiliar territory little by little familiar. Now, I want to explain another aspect of the time reactor, which will kind of parlay into the question that Sasha posed. And because it goes much deeper, there's something that David developed called a temporal, which means time, but he calls it the temporal tremor detector, the temporal tremor detector. And I've basically been told to a certain extent, but also figured out to a certain extent how this works. In the time reactor, there is part of the device. See, it starts with a low-grade electromagnetic field that is basically a rotating magnetic field, and then into this magnetic. Now, the reason the rotation is important, because any rotation has this effect which is called frame dragging, which means a time differential. And that time differential is infinitesimal, like the time differential of the frame dragging of the Earth going around, meaning that it sort of means that the Earth is kind of winding up like a spring, but it's so slow and the differential is so tiny that it's infinitesimal. Nevertheless, the Earth harnesses all this power. Now,
yes,
this frame dragging effect is going to occur on any rotating body, even though smaller than the Earth. So when you have this rotating magnetic field, you're starting the most rudimentary form of frame dragging, but what you're also doing with this electromagnetic field is you're inserting a gas. And I would call it an inert gas or a noble gas. And I asked him if it was a noble gas that he inserted, and he said no comment, which tells me that it is. And it would make sense, because I once had Preston Nichols give me a whole lecture on the noble gases and time travel. When I came back and asked him to repeat it, he couldn't remember a word he said. And this was so that was my first clue that there was something to the noble gases. And of course, why are they called noble gases? But because they was part of the periodic table of elements. But in any case, this gas is inserted into this rotating electromagnetic field, and then the field is contoured by a series of lasers, which can contour the roundness of and can create, change the field. They can change the electrons of the field. It's sort of like what occurs in what's called a plasma generator. And then there are these sensors put around it, which are basically interferometers. And an interferometer is something, it's like an interferometer, an interferometer. These are things that they use in optics and astronomy, where you'll send a signal into an area and then get a feedback, and you'll be able to analyze the signal. Now, this is a complex process which has, I think, 43 different data points in the sensors. So this interferometer is sending out a signal, and it's getting back 43 different data points in each sensor. Now, that's basically being fed into a computer, which is figuring out how to maintain this field, how to adjust the rotation of it, adjust the electrons in it, and basically what this whole operation does, this is the time reactor, which slows down or speeds up time. Now, where I'm going with this, though, is the idea of the sensor, because he told me that the temporal tremor detector is part of the apparatus, is a satellite in outer space. So you have this sensor up in a satellite, and this satellite can tell where temporal distortions are occurring anywhere on the Earth. So, in other words,
is this a human satellite or an extraterrestrial satellite?
Totally human satellite, government satellite, whatever you want to say. I don't know who put it up. I don't know the proprietary interest in the satellite, but he's very much into the satellite business. But in any case, he can tell if somebody in China is experimenting with time and somebody in Japan, and he can go knock on their door and say, you're experimenting with time here. We'd like to talk to you. And they say, who the hell are you? We want to talk to you. So, and he can tell this because when you get two areas of frame dragging, And he discovered this through the research on the time reactor, where he realized that there was more energy coming out than was being put into it. He realized that two areas of where frame dragging is occurring create something energy called what he has coined as space-time motive force. And space-time motive force is basically harnessing the energy of the Earth. And this can supply the entire grid of the Earth if the energy is harnessed and distributed in concert with all the political issues and logistical issues that would have to be gone through to accomplish this. So in other words, what he's doing is he has a lot of power. And I'm not talking just about energy power. I'm talking about, this is the politics of the universe. This is the politics, you can call it ET politics, you can call it whatever you want. Why? So in other words, me coming out and talking about this stuff is kind of like, yeah, okay, I'm explaining what's going on and people can start putting two and two together. But the governments already know about this. The government, at certain levels of the government, it's almost like congressmen could listen to this interview and start saying, well, what's going on here? Yeah, I could learn about this. And most of them would not know too much. There might be some select ones that know certain things. And certainly this technology is all buried in the Air Force, but it's not, and other military offices. But it's not known by everybody, obviously. But the reason they have never done away with Dr. Anderson is because they need him, because he knows more than they do in certain respects. That doesn't mean they don't have projects that are independent of him, but he knows how to keep himself alive. And
so how many people are doing time experimentation? Is it nobody? Lots of people? A few people?
Yeah, what kind of results when they look at where this is happening over the globe? Where is it happening?
Because we have stories, we have all the Montauk and all that stuff through time, and we have yes.
And well, maybe not a lot, but there's a considerable amount of them. And anyway, the thing with the stories, what I notice in the stories, is that these often revolve around people wanting to get attention, as opposed to actually being time travelers. Now, there's a whole character that's a myth called John Titor that has excited a lot of interest. This is a total fictional myth, and because I know one of the persons who was asked to consult on it, and then he's resurfaced lately, and people are saying John Titor time travel. So you get the BS factor that will come in very quickly. A lot of the stuff that Al Bielek and Preston Nichols would talk about is hard to reconcile to the point where it can be considered as good as spurious, only because it can't be reconciled. It could be dead-ass true, but it's not reconcilable. So the thing is, when we're talking, this is what I'm learning, is that there are people who are time traveling, but though they're not necessarily talking about it. Because it's sort of like this. If you can imagine a white, quote-unquote, advanced culture going to an indigenous area in New Guinea, and they're looking at the natives of New Guinea, they're not going to go in and talk to the natives on a quid pro quo basis. They're not going to be going in and talking to them about Major League Baseball, about politics in the United States, about politics in England, about the subway system in Paris. They're not going to talk about these things because the indigenous people aren't going to know what the hell they're talking about, and there's going to be a cultural gap. And they're even, if they're smart, they're going to be reluctant to become a cargo cult because this is going to confuse the hell out of the indigenous people, giving them things that they don't need, and they're going to create a lot of errant thinking about. It's going to disrupt their culture. So we have a culture, if we can look at ourselves as the indigenous natives of New Guinea and look at the time travelers as a quote-unquote advanced civilization, Western civilization, they're not going to be eager to talk to us because there will be a coherency factor. Now, we're not even going into the alien paradigm here. We're going into the time-traveling paradigm of people who might look and act like us more so. because there have been instances of time travel cults or reports of them. They're very obscure. I'm on the cusp of learning more about them. I don't like to report on things irresponsibly, and nothing has really come forth that I found substantive worth of reporting on. Just that this seems to be the new trend. So, and we've gone through various trends in all this latter day spontaneity of information coming forth, from abductions to, all the stuff
right.
that is.
Yeah, the contactee experiencer phenomenon is on the rise, and there are more and more people coming out about their experiences, as well as whistleblowers, quote unquote, people that have been in secret projects, secret space program. So we are living in very, very interesting times. So the time travel aspect also ties in with teleportation. Is that correct?
Well, it does, and anything is potential. What David talks about is he's very concerned. He says, when you look into the timeline, you don't have to go into the timeline. You just look into it and it changes the timeline. And he seems to have a very grave sense of responsibility. I asked him if he ever had looked into the Montauk projects or Philadelphia experiments, and he said he attempted to, but he never has. And, when you talk to him, and you can even hear it on the podcast I have at digitalmontauk.com, podcast number 8, he'll, it's sort of, he's very distant about looking into the timeline. Like, it's almost like a thou shalt not look into the timeline because it will change things irreparably. Now, I don't know how he can say that without actually having some experience doing it, which obviously he has.
Right.
He has, but it's something that he talks about that should be done with great care, and there are probably protocols for it.
Well, there's a new movie out called Packing for Mars, and they have a man from the Vatican who, he's now deceased, but he reported that they have, they call it the chronovisor, I think, or the Vatican calls it something else. Andrew Basiago called it the chronovisor. So that's the looking without going system. So apparently there's a lot of reports that it does exist and that people have used it. And he said that it was, he got to work on it, and then it was pulled and by the Vatican, and it's no longer, it's either destroyed or hidden. So nobody could get it. It might be for that reason, that it could, like you said, change things if you're looking.
There was a book called Father Ernetti's Chronovisor. It still exists, I'm sure. I know that we sold quite a few of them through Sky Books. I don't know if the publisher is still doing it. I mean, that was, it wasn't a very well-written book. It was about a Father Ernetti who had a chronovisor, and the Vatican, one of the key players who affected the chronovisor, this is the most interesting aspect of the entire subject, because it's very easy to, talk about things, but was an exorcist. He was like the top exorcist. I think he came out of Venice, but he was the top exorcist in the Catholic Church. So it was very interesting that they had the idea of an exorcist being involved in time travel. And this is where you get down to the nitty-gritty of the subject, because I have had David Anderson appear in my life in conjunction with phenomena that comes out of the subject of magic. And when I talk about magic, I'm talking about the work of John Dee and Aleister Crowley. In other words, and if you go into John Dee's work, you'll see that the angels that John Dee spoke for, he admonishes one of the angels, I believe it is the Archangel Michael, in his what he thinks is the Archangel Michael, or identifies himself as the Archangel Michael. He admonishes him for being late to the appointment, seance, whatever you want to call it. The Archangel admonishes him and says, we moveth time, time doesn't move us. So it basically says, Those archangels are the time, the spirits of time. They have an agenda with time, and this takes us back to that concept of patience in the Christ. And where does all of this fit in theologically? That because angels are messengers, but angels have also been, in Christian theology, have been constructed to where they are assigned different roles. So you would have, the angels of this function, the angels of that function, and the angels of time. The Greeks had two gods of time. Kronos, or Saturn, we're more familiar with. He was the god of quantitative time, the god of the harvest. But they also had another god named Kairos. Kairos was the god of the quality of time. So he was opportunity. He was carpe diem, seize the moment. And he had a lock of hair on his head. And you had to grab that hair. You had opportunity was fleeting.
Okay, we'll stop with Kronos with time, and we'll be back in about 3 minutes. So we'll see you after the break. Thank you, Peter. See you soon.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Tune in Tuesdays at 12 noon Eastern on Studio A to hear Tammy Adams share her knowledge of an unknown realm on Talking with Your Angels. Join Tammy as she uncovers hidden secrets about the spiritual world of angels, ghosts, and other entities that have been with us longer than we know. Tammy is a psychic, a teacher, spiritual coach, a leader in her field, and will be sharing her information and stories with you. So join us on Tuesdays at noon on Studio A. With Tammy's guidance, you'll find out who has been watching over you from the other side, and soon you will be talking with your angels.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And I'm your host, Janet Kira Lesson, with Dr. Sasha Lesson, and we're talking to Peter Moon, and we're talking about time travel. And I have always loved time travel. Oh, before that, I got to do my little commercial break. Please do go over to the button on freedomslip.com and make your donation. We appreciate your donation. Please donate what you can, $1, $5, $15, $20, whatever you donate is greatly appreciated. And your donations allow Revolution Radio to bring us programs like ours and many others. So, I just want to say I have always been fascinated with time travel. It seems like our films are full of time travel, Back to the Future, Groundhog Day, all the different Star Trek episodes. Is there truly an evil twin guy with a beard of Spock in another multiverse, and et cetera, et cetera? It certainly has captured H.G. Wells, the time travel, whatever that one was called. It's captured the imagination of humanity for many, many years, and perhaps there's something to it. And I want to talk about what are the implications and how would we use this. But Dr. Lesson, what would you like to say?
It seems that there's time, even in the present, there's different time travels. For example, for most Americans, World War II ended in 1945, but for a whole subculture, the Battle of the Waddell Sea, where Byrd was defeated, occurred in 1947. There's such different realities that Mr. Trump and Mr. Obama's realities are totally different. You ask them to talk about the time, and it's almost like we're many people passing each other in different time things and just barely intersecting. This is quite an interesting picture that you're painting in my mind, Peter.
Well, you painted a very interesting one there, because you're quite right. It's that you have people on divergent courses. We have so many different types of humanity on this planet with different cultures. So much of the indigenous culture has been so wiped out, and that it goes beyond what we know of the Native American, that people don't even know of the cultures that have been wiped out. So, and then you can have people, so-called good people like you and I, or our friends, people that we consider friends, that would have somewhat sympathies to ours, who would be advocating people who are part of groups that have wiped out these cultures, and they don't even realize it. This is the sort of madness of this civilization and the potpourri of civilization, which it emphasizes the need to ground and to create harmony within your own sphere, because the universe can become very destabilizing if, to the degree that you see too much.
Right, you have to balance your public and your private aspects, and mind your ecology.
That's correct. It all has to do with health and mental health as well. And it's very interesting when we think back to this idea of, when I talk about magic corresponding to the time travel and the angels corresponding to this, because what you have is you have a reaction. Well, I mean, we all know that this evolution itself is based upon, action, reaction, counteraction. And this is how genes will deal with a problem. But we also have this problem when we deal with time. And because I have a background with L. Ron Hubbard, I just want to say something. One thing I've learned, courtesy of Revolution Radio, and Douglas Dietrich, who basically was assigned to burn the files on L. Ron Hubbard. And of course, Douglas has no affiliation with L. Ron Hubbard or Scientology, but he does say that L. Ron Hubbard was a master. He was the Navy's top guy when it came to psychological operations. And and so, when you talk about where does this guy come up with this therapy, Margaret Singer, who was the consultant on the Patty Hearst case about, with Stockholm Syndrome and all that, and I think she's considered a bad person by people that don't like shrinks or whatnot, but she's considered an expert in certain circles. But the thing she said about Scientology, she said it was the profound depths to which it affected people, and she was referring to a negative sense, was, far worse than, the Korean stuff. So she was saying, what's happened to these people's minds? They're so, twisted, different or whatnot. And what I would attribute that to, and I would not say that everybody who did Scientology had a negative experience like she was alluding to. Some did, some didn't. But it was because Hubbard was a master of psychology, and he learned from this guy, Commander Thompson, who learned from Freud. And that's not to say that the use of this stuff can be positive or negative. But it was a profound understanding which led and use of this procedures, which led Margaret Singer to say, God, this stuff can really screw somebody up. And Hubbard would have told you that himself, that it could really screw somebody up if it was misused. Now, where I'm going with this is that this psychological influence that Hubbard understood and had on the mind, as he went forward in time, he began to promote these ideas of freeing the spirit from the body. And I experienced these things in a very positive way. And he developed techniques that were to repair people who had left the body and were discombobulated. And it was very popular technology called interiorization, exteriorization, rundown. And around this time is when the remote viewing community of Hal Pudov, Ingo Swann, and Pat Price came out of Stanford Research Institute. And what you had, now this, when I'm talking about we go back to the interferometer. When spirit moves in a certain direction and certain things happen, if we're talking about an angelic reference point or an interferometer reference point, these things are noticed on certain register meters that could even be in the angelic realm. And we can parlay angelic realm and invert it into the demon realm. And the point I'm getting here is that Scientology as a movement began to flourish and prosper and boomed in 1971, the year I got into it. And I was the beneficiary of that, I guess, resurgence and benefited much in 1971. And that's how I was introduced to it, in a very upbeat part of its history, and had a lot of good care taken by others with me. But the point of it is Scientology began to go askew. And Hubbard, who had a government background, a Navy background, was not embraced by the governments. And he fought the governments fought him, and he was basically, his organizations were raided in 1977, which is a whole other story. But and then you come out, this remote viewing technology comes out in the early 90s, as it starts being commercialized, and it's all being run from the satanic operations level of the U.S. government, the psychological warfare, PsyOps. Now, see, the government did not embrace Hubbard, but they embraced the satanic chaplain of the United States. So you see, for whether Hubbard was good, bad, or indifferent is not the case. He was not embraced, but you had something else embracing this sort of idea of people being able to see remotely or get out of their bodies and accomplish certain things with varying degrees of success, all of which is highly questionable. Nevertheless, you had an embrace of psychological warfare operations that Hubbard was escorted out the back door, so to speak, and other features were embraced, which embraced Satanism quite openly. So when we talk about time, and these sources have also knocked against David Anderson's work. So
it's always the militarization of any technology. It's the military co-opts whatever the technology is and uses it, the clandestine military intelligence.
Yes, that's one way to look at it. But there's another way to look at it is who's running the military. And I would be the first to tell you, not everybody in the military is bad, evil, or even there are what you might say, angelic influences that even affect the military. Because some of the people in the military were very outraged by what was going on during the George Bush administration. And so basically what you have, this all comes down to a war in the heavens. And we can go into the angelic / demonic realm. And I'm going to say something here that I've never said on the air before because I've never delineated it. And this is part of the stuff that would come out of Space Time Labs with Preston Nichols, is that there are basically 8 domains. And the 4th domain would be considered the middle domain. This is where we are, okay? The 6th domain, which is a step away from We're not talking about 5. We're talking about domain 6 is the domain of the angels. The third domain would be the domain of the demons. Now, of course, that's it. What the hell is the 5th domain in the 3rd domain? Excuse me. I'm getting my domains good. 4th domain is where we are. 6th domain, 7th domain is domain 6th. I'm getting myself confused. 7th domain would be the domain of the angels. God, I'm confused. 4th domain, 6th domain. Anyway, you've got a domain. Maybe I shouldn't start numbering them because I'm confusing myself. But you have the domain of where we are. You have a domain of the angels, a domain of the demons. You also have a domain in between, which is the domain in between the angels and the humanity, and a domain in between the demons and humanity. 2 rungs above the angels, you would have pure God or positive creation. Antithesis would be satanic or negative creation. And then you'd have a realm in between the angels and God, or the demons and the devil. So you have all these different realms, and I've gotten the numberings of them a little confused. I believe it goes 8 to 1. But in any case, this is what we're dealing with.
So one would be total satanic, and 8 would be the angelic, total God, right? So that's
one would be totally God, one would be totally Satan, and then you've got all the gray areas in between, with humanity kind of stuck right in the middle. And,
right.
If we look at that from a yin-yang perspective, or the yin-yang symbol, you want to have everything rotating in movement and be in harmony, because you cannot, neutralize the darkness. I mean, you can neutralize it within a certain sphere, but you can't dispose of it, because all that symbol teaches you that in the great darkness is a bit of light, and in the great light is a bit of darkness. And if it wasn't that way, everything would be stagnant. So when we're dealing with time, it all comes back to, the lessons of angelicness, the lessons of demons, the lessons of life, balance, equilibrium.
It's interesting in history, the role of the angels. The angels, which in Sumerian they would call Nergal and Ninurta, came to Sodom and Gomorrah, and people tried to kill them because they said, "Hey, these guys are spies." And they have powers, and they zap people, and they just came to see if we went over to the enemy, to Marduk. And so there was these riots against the angels. And then there was this other one that fought Jacob and wounded him, so he became Israel, he who fought with an angel. So they were violent and murderous, as well as being dancing on the head of pins and being sweet, in at least in the ancient literature.
In the literature, but I think what you're talking about is the continuum between, creation, like the polarity, dark and light, and everything in between. So it gets played out, and we need to have that. Nassim Haramein has a nice illustration that it's yin-yang, which has the light in the dark and the light. And when you rotate it, that becomes the singularity, the wormhole upon which everything travels.
Wow. You can also parlay that symbol into the human body. And you can parlay that and see how it folds out into the human body. And this is part of harnessing your power, harnessing your chi. And when you harness chi in the human, in the practice of Qigong, which I practice, and when you really harness it well, it'll move like a time reactor. It'll bop somebody. I've only had it happen. I've only kind of administered that once, and it was quite by accident, where somebody just kind of like, boom, moved. And, my teacher can, he can do that at will. He can bop people all over the place, but he doesn't, because it would hurt them.
What's the purpose of our government studying time travel, or other people doing time travel? Are they manipulating time, creating a timeline that makes their outcomes?
They want to see how, they change things.
What is going on, or what do you speculate is going on? I know you were intensely involved with Montauk, and they were playing with parallel universes and timelines and outcomes.
Let
Can you
me
tell
say
our listeners a little bit more
this.
about that?
Let me say this
Go ahead.
about parallel universes. David Anderson has said very specifically that in his research he has come across no parallel universes. Now, he doesn't say they don't exist. He was a colleague of John Everett Wheeler. Not John Everett Wheeler. John Archibald Wheeler. John Archibald Wheeler. And he was a colleague of his. And of course, Wheeler, was very he was the author of the Many Worlds theory. But he said in his work with the time travel research, he's not encountered parallel universes. Now, he said this to me in June when we did this podcast, number 8, at digitalmontauk.com, which you can find. Then, at the end of June, my wife, Romanian wife, wanted to meet Preston Nichols, so we went up, arranged to meet Preston. We had quite an experience up there in Cairo, New York, and he said that I asked him about the parallel, and he was already dealing with parallel universe phenomena, and he said that, I said, what do you have to say about this? He says, why isn't David finding any parallel universes? He says, well, number one is he's not looking for them, and number two, he's not putting himself into a position where he would find them. Now, I did a whole article on that and what Preston Nichols had to say. I gave a graphic on it, which was an improved graphic that I had in the Montauk Project Experiments in Time. I improved the graphic that shows how parallel universes work, which is I think it called, there's one of the appendix has a whole article on parallel universes, which did a lot to stimulate people's mind on the subject at the time when it was released in 1992. But basically, and I wrote an open letter to David Anderson in that, saying, if you're going to look at it, here's a way to look at it. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean there's not parallel universes. It just means that he's not cavorting with them and or not reporting. If he is cavorting on them, he's not reporting it. So I just wanted to address that subject of the parallel universe. On the other hand, Preston Nichols seems to be dealing with all sorts of parallel phenomena. But then again, when I saw Preston, I was told he had been in excellent health a few months earlier, but he was never so thin and he was in poor health. He'd been in and out of the hospital at least twice since then. Last I heard, he was okay and getting better, but his health has been a struggle. His environment is chaotic. So I would say if you were to meet David, you have a much, I guess what you call nip and tuck persona that's not dealing, he might be dealing with a lot of wild and crazy things, but he ain't talking about them, and he does not look ill or disheveled. So, in other words, if you want the weird stuff, be careful of what you ask for or what you wish for. And David's work has been certainly more coherent. I wouldn't discount Preston. Preston has been a victim of what he's been involved with. And I can't say that David hasn't either, because my impression of David Anderson is that when we both entered this world, and it was like, I think when you enter this world, kind of see what's going to happen before, just as if you're going to the circus or the ball game. You see you're going to go to the ball game, you think I'm going to, buy some popcorn and a hot dog and get out the other side and park here and get home by 10 o'clock. You might see I'm going to go into this life for what this. I always felt that David and I both entered this world to accomplish similar things, but that he took a greater sacrifice, being that what he had to do was, do things by obtaining a black card security clearance, to where he has to go through a certain amount of BS to be able to access what he has to access to do his work on this plane, because of the science and technology he's involved with. Because I'm not dealing with science and technology on a day-to-day basis, I'm I don't have that burden.
Yeah, you're
Right.
free.
Are we having a bleed through of timelines, so to speak? I had a phenomenon happen the day before yesterday. I called my girlfriend. She answered the phone. She says, "Hey, phone goes dead." So I called right back. Her boyfriend that she lives with answers the phone. I said, "Can I talk to Karen?" So he goes and gets her. And then she comes on the phone and says, "Hey." And I said, "I just talked to you and you said, hey. Well, what happened? Did you answer the phone before?" She goes, "No, I was in the other room." And I went, whoa, this is like Twilight Zone. Is it possible that we're having some kind of bleed through of timelines? Because that was not the first time something weird like that has happened.
I've had that happen too, but I don't think it has to do with the particular time. I had it happen with the only person I've seen, move in time. It's the only way I can describe it, and that was on the August biorhythm. That was timing related. But one time I saw her park her car, come around the building so faster than she could have done. And when I called her on it, I said, nobody could move that fast in time. She said, no. She says, you got here before I did. And I was sitting in my car, and I saw you, and you got out and walked out of your car. And then I thought, and I said, no, there was nobody in the parking lot when I came. So we kind of like crossed paths in time. She saw me. She saw me after I got there, or I saw her after she got there. She saw me. I got there before she did, but she got there before I did. I don't know. It was all confused. So this stuff, I've seen it happen before. But this particular individual has, I guess, what you would call fractured time. She will look at a situation and she will see split timelines going off in different directions. Which one, like the fork in the road in The Wizard of Oz, which one are you going to go down? And this is very traumatic and painful to her. It's not a pleasant experience. So these things tend to happen around people. I know with Duncan Cameron, if you're in the car with him, it can seem like, it's supposed to be 45 minutes to get here from Connecticut, but it only took, 25. What's going on? So sometimes people will carry a time factor with them that will change it. Now, maybe as we move forward into different times, we will, as a collective, experience more of this. Time travel does not seem to be as an absurd a subject as it was, 1950. It was always movies, TV shows in particular about time travel, but our culture takes it more seriously than it did. Even though when you get down to the nitty-gritty, people really, people will want to watch Back to the Future and a host of movies on time travel, but they don't necessarily, when I start talking about it, they don't necessarily think I'm for real, and they can be quite dismissive. So when you take it for real, it's on a whole different level.
Right. So in this Packing for Mars, they were talking about the man from the Vatican who had the chronovisor, and then there was Andrew Basiago, and he was telling about all these different things that he had done through the time travel experiments until the investigator traveled via car to the places that Andrew had described as part of this time travel research. So he verified these locations that they existed. And there were some very strange things. The facility at the top of the mountain reminded me of your books on Montauk, where we go to Montauk and there's this big radar. So what's going on with Montauk? Is it deactivated? What's going on with the different time travel programs? Do you have any inside information on what's really going on?
Well,
here we are in time.
Montauk, basically, the technology, you have to look at how culture evolved particularly, I guess you could call it conspiracy culture, if you will. Around the time of the Montauk Project book and when it was written, there was still funny stuff going on at Montauk. Whether they were manipulating people in time or not, who knows? But certainly the base was forced to become public, which it is now public. They had to take but there was this black helicopter phenomenon. You'd often see black helicopters if you went out to Montauk. And when I was investigating it, I had black helicopters coming over my house. I had black helicopters appearing when I would think certain thoughts. I would have, and when I think the initial success of the Montauk Project was greeted, I think the first thing we printed 3,000 copies. We had those sold within, we printed them in May. We had them sold by October. I had 5,000 copies printed in October. They were sold out by the next spring or summer. I had 10,000 printed up. Of course, you print up.
Wait, so you're basically, the books are saying that the U.S. government agencies murdered many people in Montauk, and that's really hot. And
I didn't say that. I'm not saying that they didn't, but what I'm saying is I'm getting to a point here. When I had these 10,000 books delivered, now when you get 10,000 books, this is like, I went from 3 to 5 to 10. When I looked up, the delivery truck pulls up, and I'm sitting there, and I'm, guy's opening up the back of the delivery truck, and he look up, and there's a stealth aircraft flying overhead within the distance of a football field.
Wow.
This is right over a suburban neighborhood. So I'm saying this is like the advanced black helicopter signal. Like what's this guy in a stealth plane doing over a suburban neighborhood? Is he trying to tell me something? I had another friend who had a stealth aircraft appear similarly when she was out at Montauk investigating. What I'm getting to here is that the lens or the paradigm, you're asking what's Montauk's doing now, there was this black helicopter paradigm. And until Rush Limbaugh finally started to attack it and say it was crazy and all these people with the black helicopter, because the Christians became very interested in the black helicopters as well. And the Black Helicopter book by Jim Keith, which was not a very well-written book, sold tens of thousands of copies. It was very popular in the Christian community. Because what the hell is the government doing with these black helicopters? Now, Preston Nichols explained that there was a certain type of black helicopter which had a spectrum analyzer which could actually read signatures of a certain area that was emanating certain types of thought. Now, I had a friend. Now, not all the black helicopters had that feature. I had a friend, Tantra Bensko, who was a Tantra teacher, and when she would be teaching or doing Tantra in her living room in Alabama, the helicopter would come down and make eye contact with her. Like, what the hell are you doing? Like it was this sort of, in that case, it was an emission of feminine energy, along with the tantric arts. So you see, there was this whole paradigm of black helicopters, and I would say that at one point I had a dream where I saw the black helicopter pilot face to face. He was sort of a older man, and then that phenomena stopped for me when I confronted him in the dream world. But what that technology, and the Montauk technology, kind of parlayed into was the HARP project. The HARP project, which was all kind of like, I guess, what you'd call cultivated, sophisticated, and refined. And what was going on at Brookhaven Labs and then Montauk Point kind of was reinvented to a higher evolution at the HARP project in Alaska. Now, HARP might parlay into chemtrails and all sorts of wonderful things, which I'm not even going to try to explain all of that mad stuff. But the HARP project is situated near an area they call the Alaskan Triangle, which is an area near Mount McKinley, not far from Mount McKinley as the crow flies, but I don't know how close it is. And this is an area mentioned in the Transylvania series of books, Secret Parchment, where there was a big, I guess what you'd call energetic concordance between this area of Alaska, Antarctica, and this area in Transylvania, which I visit pretty much every year now, visiting, and which David Anderson said in the podcast that there was this area, in this area of Transylvania, a huge discharge of a time reactor either 200 or 2,000 years ago. I will be revisiting this cave. I will be revisiting this cave. It's called Choklovina Cave, C-O-I, Clovina, C-L-O-V-I-N-A, Choklovina Cave in Transylvania, which is predominantly known for its bats, but which fits in nicely with my last book, The White Bat.
Right.
Anyway, I had been there by happenstance for my last trip, and I will be revisiting it this August. And the so you know, this area in Alaska. So when you talk about Montauk, what happened at Montauk? It's evolved into different aspects, different iterations. One of which is the HARP project. And I also personally see Preston was talking about a shield being built around the Earth. This was in the late 1990s. And to protect us from the rays of the sun, scientists were working on all sorts of things. And he was participating in it. And 2 years after the fact, the newspapers were reporting on some of the stuff he was saying with regards to the sun. Then, so basically, I could kind of intuit at that time, based upon what Preston was giving in those lectures, that scientists were probably putting something around our very sun. There's probably a HARP project around the sun itself. There's so much going on in outer space. If you watch the NASA channel and all of these things, you can't absorb the information. One person cannot absorb it. If you were to read, they used to have the newspaper clipping service where you could get everything on a certain subject in all the newspapers across the country. Well, now we have internet and TV. You can't keep up with everything that's going on. So I would say that it's parlayed into many different things.
You know, so the HARP thing, in a way, might be, and there might be other arrays, even on ships, a way of bending the time space to take hazards that would otherwise destroy Earth out of a trajectory that would hurt Earth, or to move Earth out of their way.
Preston Nichols has always taught that projects like that have many layers of many different things. And it could well be that, as well as many other things. And Douglas Dietrich has also said some very interesting things about HARP and how it's used to sort of trap souls.
Wow. Oh, yeah. We've heard Douglas before. Douglas is an interesting character.
Trap souls?
Well, the whole trap soul thing is apparently Errol the Great Roswell in Spencer's book, what was it called, Interview with the Alien Interview. She talks about that this is a prison planet. This whole part of the solar system is a trap soul, so they can't go beyond this sphere of influence. So that's a possibility. I was just looking at the pyramid in, you were talking about Mount McKinley. Linda Moulton Howe and Whitley Strieber had a YouTube about the Big Pyramid, and I just tried to pull it up, and it was by Mount McKinley. So there apparently is of anomalies up there that, and this pyramid is supposed to be still active, and it could power all of Canada, and that the government is, flying people up there that work there, and they're closely monitoring this active pyramid.
And the ancients were using these pyramids in the same way as our clandestine government is using HARP. They're using it to protect the planet to some degree from debris from outer space.
Well, it's interesting, and I'm going to parlay this back to the Qigong, because one of the most foundational points of Qigong is the pyramids in your body. And the pyramid in your body, it's the foundational pyramid that martial arts like to refer to as core power. It's called your qua, and it's down in that groin area, and it comes up to your navel area, and it's an upside-down pyramid. And above that, energetic is another pyramid that's right side up, that comes up to your solar plexus area. And then you have another one that goes up from there, upside down again, that would be sort of cover your heart area. The base of it, upside down pyramid, being your clavicle. And then you'd have another one that would go up to your head, and over your head, sort of like a pharaoh's headdress that he would wear. And right where the capstone of that pyramid would be the area that people identify with as the third eye. And above that, you would have another upside down pyramid. In these upside down pyramids are referred to as the qua, the upper qua, and they're where you generate your power from in movement. You're moving with empowerment. You can move, like when you move physically in a martial art and you move those pyramids, with the pyramids, they're moving in tandem, you're going to be much more powerful in pushing or punching. But you can also use these on a higher level to generate power within the body, just as if you were talking about protecting the earth. You can protect your own internal auric functions by sort of becoming aware of the energy patterns of the human body. So it's like as above, so below. When you get into the earth, these are just bigger issues, bigger things to confront and face. And this kind of grounds, because it can get pretty scary out there when you start looking at all the crazy stuff that's out there. That's why
the pyramids, are they connected to teleportation and time travel in any way, from what your findings are, especially where you go?
Well, the pyramid, the Preston Nichols had what was called the Delta T antenna, which was an octahedron, which is here's a pyramid and an upside down pyramid. So it's doing exactly what I was saying within the body. And this would tell you, if he's using that with three coils around the pyramid, X, Y, Z, X coil, Y coil, and Z coil, going around each outer, I don't know, call it rib of the pyramid or whatnot. One going around the side, one going around the up and down, one going around the sideways. So you had three coils, basically, with the pyramid that was used to what he called the delta time function, changing time, delta being change. So he called this a delta T antenna, which was used to basically change time. So yeah, the pyramids are related to time, but I would also say, if based upon what Preston experienced, the human body would have the potential for time as well, just by virtue of the pyramid connection. But this is, of course, an evolved situation. This is not something you can expect to go out and do.
Whitley Strieber was describing how he found that he time traveled. Somehow I can't remember how he did it, but he found that it happened. He had seen himself when he was in a classroom. A man comes into the classroom, and this man looked at him, and then years later, it was an older man, a grown man, looking at Whitley in the classroom. And then years later, he was the grown man looking at the child in the classroom. So, anyway, that was just is that possible for us to go back in time and see ourselves like when we were 5 years old?
Anything's possible. He's had a lot of weird experiences. You can adopt or assume any viewpoint if you have the breadth of, I guess, perception and dimension. And I would say, and I could turn around and ask you both of this as practitioners of Tantra. Have there been times when you looked into your partner and saw that maybe you were kind of looking out of their eyes?
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And in Trespasos, you look deeply into one another's left eyes while you're joined in Yabyung. And you look in the left eye and you look so deeply that till you see yourself and you feel your consciousness in the apparent other, and you realize you're one, and that it was the spurious dichotomy between the two of you is gone.
And also in Tantra, I'll just say one thing back to you, Peter. In Tantra, I have been in a high orgasmic state, and I've gone out of body. I'm an astral traveler all my life. I've been able to just astrally go up almost at will, but repeatedly since infancy. The awareness, I came back with the awareness that I've been traveling at night. So when I went into a tantric practice, I am able to travel out of my body, and I go through what you're describing, the dimensions, and I go all the way to the highest level, and I do what I call a high five with God, with Source, and I kind of like connect, just say hi. I'm not staying, I'm going back. I'm not done with this level of existence, and I'm going back to finish, what I'm doing here. But it's very interesting in Tantra that I can reconnect.
Oh, and one point, Janet, just what you said about the round wing the stealth ship that was falling. She actually brought in ETs on a library ship that was coming by.
Yeah, it goes into. I'm able to contact different beings, and I even found a ship, and I start describing what's going on there. So I'm doing a lot of remote viewing when I do Tantra, and I'm also, imagine that there's a correlation between the time travel and out-of-body travel, all those things. You can go back through time.
The story about when Crowley did Tantra in the Giza.
Well, that's Peter's story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not my story. It's Crowley's story. But yeah.
Crowley's story, but you reported about it in one of your books. Yeah.
Well, yes. And it ignited. See, when Crowley wrote, that inspired. He had sex in the Great Pyramid, and Crowley has sex. He's not just having sex. He was having Rose Kelly, who I believe is a descendant of Edward Kelly from the Enochian Keys stuff. And then he comes around this is on August 12th in the Biorhythm, 1903. And then the next April, in 1904, he pens the Book of the Law. This is the anniversary of the Book of the Law, 8th, 9th, and 10th. And he pens this book, and it's been decoded to a remarkable degree in my book, the Montauk Book of the Living, with the help of a person who was involved with Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis, who was kicked out of it when he started decoding things, and they didn't accept it. But it's very clear, and basically what Crowley's Book of the Law is a hidden demonstration of DNA. When they didn't have DNA in science then. He was demonstrating the geometry of DNA. And of course it wasn't Crowley, it was whatever was speaking through him. And speaking through him in a language that was very intimidating, and is intimidating to this day to anybody, most people anyway, and can easily corrupt them. But it was basically describing what DNA is and how it acts, and it can act in any old which way. But so when we talk about the subject of Tantra, magic, or time travel, yes, they do fit together. And I think there's a book called Illusions by Richard Bach. It was his Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and he kind of explains very well the reaction that happens when one hits a certain level of truth, where one begins to sort of transit out of this dimension, and it gives a very hard reaction by the people that basically want to destroy the purveyor of this manifestation. because it destabilizes their reference points in this dimension. Now, this is what happens in the story of Christ. He has to be disposed of because this dimension basically is not good enough for him. He's not good enough, or he's not appropriate for it. So basically, you know, you don't belong here. We're taking, you get the hell out of here because we don't want us to do this. We're here to suffer our existence here, and we're here to suffer our existence, and we're going to live in this existence, and don't try and take us out of it because, we got to get our kids fed and get them to school and have them grow up and become bankers or lawyers or whatever they're going to do, and you're disrupting. You're a disruptor. You are a disruptor. So this is what happens. So when you begin to adventure on some of these paths, the average banker citizen is not going to be able to practice Tantra without disrupting their environment, without probably disrupting their own psyche. In other words, so any of these things you do, whether it be time travel, whether it be Tantra, whether it be reading books by Richard Bach or whatever, you want to do it in such a way that you can integrate it with the environment, integrate it with reality, because if you do not, there will be consequences that you will have to endure and or learn from. That's what I say.
Yeah, it seems like that, what you just said there summarizes it. That's why we don't move from a level 0 civilization to a level 1. And it's really ironic, I'm sitting here and Michio Kaku is right in front of my face. It's almost like I'm supposed to talk about Michio Kaku's level 1 and level 0. So we can't move out of this paradigm because the paradigm doesn't want us to, because they're still in the reality of money and raising your children to become lawyers and bankers, etc.
Well, I think you can embrace both the sacred and the mundane, and you can witness yourself and work out an ecology and a coordination of meeting the needs of your spiritual side and your everyday side in a way that's in harmony with the people that you care about.
Well, aren't we getting tired of war? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, what I was just going to say, what's been coming up a lot lately for me is that the more perceptive I get, the more I learn, the more wisdom I acquire or am exposed to. You only acquire that which you take with you and that which you adopt. You could be exposed to all sorts of wisdom, and you might pick this, that, or the other thing. But lately what it's been is, the more we grow, the more we understand, the more we realize we're exactly right at the point we are supposed to be, because we've supposed ourselves to be there. And the more we can be at peace and harmony and understanding with where we are, the more evolved we will be. We are, like, in other words, if God is in every moment, we're never disconnected from God. We have these experiences. We need to flow with the experience, learn from the experience, and grow from it. And this is a very profound thing, because it's the only world we can change is our own world. If we change our own world, we might be changing other worlds. So, this makes it, and I'm not trying to make it easier to embrace our afflictions, but the only thing you really can do with your afflictions is embrace them. Or you can reject them, in which case you can go into an addiction paradigm where you're rejecting the fact that you have a problem, rather than just embracing the problem, embracing the situation. We have a lot of issues on Earth, with Earth itself as a culture. And, people panic about them. A lot of the panic that gets done is by you're panicking about things they can't do anything about. And now we have these commercials. It's like almost all the commercials on TV for food are saying non-GMO, non-GMO, non-GMO. Where does this come from? I understand that.
Everybody's worried about GMO.
I understand that in your poor area of Hawaii that it's loaded with GMO.
Oh, we got it banned. But that doesn't mean they're not putting in it. But we got it legally banned.
There's a lot of deformed kids there, in the island of Maui, or the Big Island. A doctor friend of mine just got back from there a few months ago. Why? Because he was having to deal with these situations. He said it's horrible what's been done to so many of those, the food supply in Hawaii in particular, the growth, the farms. So we have a lot of situations, and you can't just embrace those. You have to react to that. But we have a TV culture that is saying that everything is non-GMO because it's becoming a bad word. Well, the stores don't necessarily say non-GMO. The vegetables are suspect, even in Whole Foods.
Right. Well, we have about, I think, 8 or 9 minutes left, so
I just really love the philosophical summary that you gave there. That was just so clear. I feel really inspired. Thank you.
Well, that's wonderful. Go ahead, Janet.
I was just going to say, what would you like to focus on in the last few minutes that we have?
Well, I'd like to say, we kind of summed it up kind of good there, but I would say that, my website, digitalmontauk.com, I'm coming out with a new website and I will be, right now there's 7 videos, time travel theory explained, and you can walk away from these things. You can show them to your physics professors and your math professors and explain to you that time travel does not violate the laws of math and physics. Now, I will be coming out with a couple more videos. These will be on a subscriber website, the Time Reactor, which will show the patent for the Time Reactor, and also the Time Reactor Explained. There will be I will begin writing books, chapter by chapter. Some of them, will have 2 or 3 chapters. I will have all my newsletters of the past will be on this, videos and tapes of Dr. David Anderson, and my podcast, a host of other subjects, will be on this new website, subscriber website, which will give people a chance to participate and learn more about this phenomena. The one thing about the Time Reactor video, the Time Reactor patent, I used to post it on my website. It would always disappear. Now, I put that Time Reactor patent in Chapter 7 of my latest book, The White Bat. So now it's in the Library of Congress. It's in thousands of books out across the world. And now I'm going to show a video of it. And when I get a certain amount of subscribers, I will release this video to the public, to anybody to come watch. And people that are in my email bank will get a notification. You can watch this. Of course, it's in the book. I haven't put it on the website because, and I will put it on the website, but I don't want it to disappear. I don't want the website to get harassed or attacked, because this patent, I give the patent number, the filing number, but it's sequestered. It was, and sequestered means that you have to have a security clearance with the government to be able to read it or watch it. Now I'm publishing it, and I'm not only publishing it, I've broken it down with these videos so you can actually understand it. This might encourage technical types to try and rebuild it. And it's not impossible to, try and rip off the design. There's 20 years of learning curve or more that he's been dealing with. And
so what is the application? What is the practical application of time travel? Do you think it'll ever become something that the average person can do, or is it always going to be?
That's a good question, and whether technology should be involved. But this question gets very esoteric, because it goes into the realms of access. Who has access? And this is why I took it into the realm of demons and angels, because it's like you get access to what you're supposed to have access to. So what I've certainly done, what I've had access to in my own life, is to educate people, and this is just science. It's just educating people that, this universe is not the way we think it is. And David always said when he exposed people to the time reactor, their response was usually laughter, because they saw that things weren't the way they saw. And by the way, he did say to me, he says, I'd really like you to meet some of these scientists at the time reactor. We could have some very interesting conversations. And he says, not at the lab. I'd like to go out to dinner or something. And I said, later, I followed that up. I said, well, you think maybe I could see the lab? He says, yeah, no problem with that. I said, there's no security issue? No, we could get you in there. And of course, he was referring to to the lab in India, which is the biggest. Now, of course, I have not heard from him since June, and it was just a carrot dangled to me as maybe this will happen. I don't know when it will happen. It will happen when it's supposed to happen. And it's certainly, makes my life more exciting than it would have been otherwise. And it's not that it's unexciting. And of course, my sights are set this August. I will be traveling to Romania once again and visiting Chaklavina Cave, where he said he was very tickled and touched by the fact that I'd been to that cave. He's telling me there was a time reactor discharge. I said, what can you tell me about Romania? He says, there's a time reactor discharge that occurred 200 or 2,000 years ago. We know from the sediment that it wasn't anything else but a time reactor. And I said, David, I was in that cave. In 2014. And he was really touched by that because, I was taken there. I didn't ask to go there. I was taken there by an archaeologist who wanted to show me the cave. I was taken there with a group of people. There was I guess what you'd call a feather ritual was done around me while I had my eyes closed in that cave. I was doing Qigong, and one of my friends did this. She gave me these feathers of this that were very precious to her. And so I had an experience in that cave, and I will go back to that cave and I learned this is another aspect to the cave, another part that I will go to. So these are very exciting things. What will happen there? What will manifest there? It will be during the biorhythm of August 11th, 10th.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
and that's just the way it works. It's not the way I planned it. These things do not happen. I said, I'm going to be there during August. It's just the way it happens.
And so there was
there's another consciousness that plans it.
Yeah, so there's a time anomaly there, a time thing. Did that correlate with Jesus, with Christ? He said about 2,000 years ago?
They have the transfiguration of Christ, according to the Romanian Orthodox Church, occurred in a place called near Piatra Neamț, where my wife was born and raised. And there's a big mountain there, which on every August 6th, maybe I can parlay myself into this, every August 6th, for about 3 days in the morning, there is a shadow effect over the mountain, and what will appear as a result of the dew and the cloud fog is a manifestation of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's huge in the sky, and this is supposedly where the transfiguration of Jesus happened, where he became the Christ. He transformed from human into Christ.
All right, with that, we have to end the show. My goodness, Peter, that was awesome. Thank you, listeners. I'm sorry I didn't get your questions, but I was just enthralled with what was saying.
Aloha.
Aloha. Love and blessings.